Hello. Today we're reviewing the book Angel Down by Daniel Kraus, which is an unmerciful and supernatural account of World War One and this year's Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I'm Jim Jalamas in Brooklyn.
I'm JB Miller in London, and this is Boomer Has It.
Set during the brutal final weeks of World War One, Private Cyril Bagger, a self-serving con man, and four disposable fellow doughboys are sent into the nightmarish terrain of no man's land. Their orders are to mercy kill a wounded soldier whose shrieks are demoralizing the troops, except when they get out into the mud, they don't find a wounded soldier, but a glowing fallen angel that's been shot out of the sky. Realizing that this angel possesses reality bending power, the men compete to extract her for their own selfish desires. And Bagger, our protagonist, is forced to navigate the moral chaos, not to mention trench warfare. And his goal is to protect the angel amidst the senseless slaughter that we know of as the Great War. The author is Daniel Kraus. He's a New York Times bestselling horror, sci-fi, and thriller author. He's known for a number of high concept books. He has some involvement with Hollywood, gaming, and some nonfiction. So maybe we begin by asking what can horror tell us about war? A horror genre writer tell us about war.
The book is written in a very descriptive manner, which we will discuss later. But it's very graphic. It somehow, I don't know how it quite did. It combines lyricism with graphic writing. I think the graphic writing comes from, I guess, his horror genre writing. I'm not familiar with those books. I'd never heard of him until he won the Pulitzer Prize, and he suddenly came on my radar. And I was interested in the subject because I'm interested in the First World War, and I was interested that a novel set in the First War got so much attention and won the Pulitzer Prize, and it is written in one sentence, technically one sentence, in the sense that there's no period throughout the novel. It's written in paragraphs, separated paragraphs, so it has a very visual structure to it when you see it on the page. Um, I have no idea if any of his horror books or his other books is. So, what are the genres he writes in? Horror and suspense.
Thrillers, horror.
Yeah.
Um, he has a
Okay.
book about a man trapped inside a sperm whale.
I mean, do you
Uh,
know if those are written also in a visually what used to like a kind of a version of concrete poetry that has a visual cohesion on a page? With the paragraph blink, 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 blink. Have you looked through
you
any
know
of
what?
the?
I do not. I do not. And I was wondering about this one sentence, this one sentence feature. Is it, those types of things strike me as gimmicky, and I didn't mind it this time. And why, I don't know.
I think maybe
I was willing to go with it.
I think you didn't mind it because it doesn't read as if it's one long sentence. It's not one long paragraph. I think the fact that it's broken up into paragraphs and each paragraph begins with the word and so in a way it's one long run-on sentence. But I didn't feel it was gimmicky. I mentioned it to my father-in-law, and he essentially said, "Oh, it's like one of those novels where, you leave out the letter P or something. Yeah, those French."
Yeah, it's a little like that. And then
But
it's interesting
it
because
doesn't read. It doesn't really read like that, though.
I think of another highly acclaimed author, Cormac McCarthy, and there are parallels with McCarthy for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's you might call Cormac McCarthy a genre writer. He wrote westerns, famously extremely violent westerns. I'd say Angel Down makes Cormac McCarthy look like Jane Austen. He
Wow.
also does something with punctuation too. he omits quotation marks in dialogue.
Are you talking about Cormac
And
McCarthy now?
yes, I am. And and it's sort of the same way that you can interpret it without the required punctuation. In Angel Down, as you pointed out, there are spaces between paragraphs and the word and. So you don't need the hard stop at the end punctuation. And
No,
with
you
Cormac McCarthy, you see the line breaks. You kind of get it. He was quoted as saying, "I don't see why you have to junk up the page with all these little marks."
yeah, punctuation is all this stuff that just soils the page. Um, it's it's got. I mean, the fact is there is an angel, and it's called Angel Down. For our YouTube viewers, I'm going to hold up the British edition, which has this contrasting white feather and an explosion, which underscores the some contrast in the book itself, which is very graphic about death and injury and bodies being blown to bits, and this pure angel that they find in the middle of no man's land between the German and the American lines. It's a very curious. I've never read a book like this. I've read a few novels and nonfiction books about the First World War, and this was unlike any of them. It has a very kind of percussive style. I should read. I'll read a short paragraph just so people can get a sense.
Yeah, give us a lick. Give us a lick of Daniel Kraus.
And it's only through the motions of inhaling that Bagger feels a brittle tightness. His face is glazed in dried blood, clearly not his own. And he orders himself not to imagine whose. It's best when blood has no deeper meaning than rain, especially in the Argonne, where so few trees remain to block the October wind that flash dries blood so rapidly to your skin. Well, that's one of the paragraphs, and it's I guess you could is that representative of it's got that very it's got I keep using the word lyrical. Is that the right word? Lyrical writing?
It I would call I think that's a good way of putting it. He goes, that passage you just read, it sounds almost a little formal compared to other parts of the book, which is a lot of casual usage and slang and swear words, which we don't use on this show. Um, and so it's a very fluid style. It's I found it really thrilling through a big part of the book, sometimes fatiguing,
Yeah,
and
because can I
easily,
tell
I
you?
would say, easily parodied too. You could easily parody this style.
Well, I hadn't even that didn't cross my mind, but he turns the language up to 11. He pushes
He
this.
does go up to 11.
He goes up to 11. So I wanted to contrast that with someone who was in the war, and that's Ernest Hemingway. I want to read just one paragraph from In Our Time, which was Ernest Hemingway's first collection of stories, and they're in between each story, a lot of them which are based on his growing up in, I think, Idaho, no, Michigan, and he has these interstitial. Well, he lived in Idaho later, but I mean, he grew up in Michigan, and there was these interstitial paragraphs in between the stories that are set in the First World War. And here's one: We were in a garden in Mons. Young Buckley came in with his patrol from across the river. The first German I saw climbed up over the garden wall. We waited till he got one leg over and then potted him. He had so much equipment on, he looked awfully surprised and fell down into the garden. There were three more came over further down the wall. We shot them. They all came just like that. So that's Hemingway's style, which is in marked contrast to Krauss's. And he's evoking an experience that he lived through less than a decade earlier, probably about 7 years earlier. And he was there, and he didn't feel the need to turn his language up to 11. He turned it down to 2.
Well, that's first of all, it's pretty jarring what you just read, killing three men seeing the expression on their faces. And it's nonfiction compared to what this adventure story, this thriller that we both read. The other part of it is contrast the prose. I mean, when I was talking about an easily parodied prose style, so is Hemingway's, for its plainness. And I'm not the only one. There's actually a bad Hemingway writing contest at least it used to
Right.
be once a year.
I entered it.
And
I entered it one year. I
how'd you
said,
do?
I don't know. They
I
didn't
did
hear
hear back.
back from them, but I thought it was very good. I later published it in Who, What, Why. But yes, that doesn't just that, eh, they're some of our greatest writers. You can parody pretty easily. That mean all it means is they have distinctive styles. Um,
And
I
distinctive voices, I would say.
yeah, it's distinctive voices. I don't. I'm not sure how easy it would be to parody. I haven't thought of it. I used to write I have a collection of literary parodies that I published about 20 years ago. The Satanic Nurses, that was written all these different styles. I'd have to give Daniel Kraus's writing some thinking to before I could even imagine parodying it or satirizing it is a nicer term. I don't know. Is that a you brought that up almost as if that was a knock at his on his
Well,
stuff.
it's so distinctive. I mean, it's electrically charged writing. Like you said, it's turned up to 11. It's a high voltage style. It doesn't take any breaks. There's hardly ever a pause. The continuous sentence, the pacing. It's a little like, maybe it's reflective of the war experience, where you're never at rest. Everything is a form of trauma, maybe. That's why.
Yeah, all right. I mean, it has so many interior contradictions in this, not just in the style, but in the content and the subject and the story. I mean, as far as this style, I mean, there are sentences that jumped out at me. One, I remember texting you once when I was reading it. This line, "Boots still potted with feet." I mean, that's just so evocative. I mean, it's that's a brilliant phrase because it's lyrical and it's graphic and it's descriptive, but to my mind, the weakest aspect of the book is weirdly the description, because I think there are times when the lyrical, and I do use that word, lyrical writing is at the expense of the visual description, to the point where the key scene in the book, or the introduction of the angel of the title, Angel Down, I couldn't visualize it. I couldn't picture it. I didn't know what this angel looked like. It just seemed that was sort of dissonance between the lyrical writing and the descriptive writing. Um, and but there, I do think the book probably rewards repeat reading, and because I noticed that when I was looking through it to find a paragraph to read on the podcast, and I thought, wow, there's some powerful writing in here, but maybe at the expense of the description. And if you can't visualize a scene, if you can't visualize the angel, I think that's a problem with the book. That's a deficit in my
Yeah, it's definitely an oversight. It's a pretty dramatic scene when they come across the angel, this supernatural being that's female. She's in agony, trapped in barbed wire, and we don't have an idea. We know she glows magically. They She's such a size that they carry her, which is kind of hard to imagine. I mean, she must be either petite or maybe supernaturally small.
and they've got.
Much later in the book, he makes an analogy to a painting from art history, which requires the reader to open up a second screen and to identify, and then you actually see it in your mind, and it comes a little late. It's a little awkward, and so yeah, I have to agree with you that The, that and certain others descriptions were very hard to follow.
I mean, I actually wonder if that reference to that painting was a mistake, because if you do go to that painting, and you found that painting, and you sent me a copy of, you texted me the picture of it, and it you shouldn't need, and you don't have to go to it, you don't have to look that up, but once you do, it just confuses matters even more, so because it doesn't look like an angel. I mean, it's the and he describes her as being in red and green, and other times or was it red and blue, which is what a nurse looks like. So I know that confused me. Or all white as an angel. When I first read about the angel, I assumed it was a allegory or the metaphor, um, but it's not. It's a real angel, and it did go through the stages of each of the soldiers who were sent out to no man's land to retrieve her, um, receive her, sort of impose upon her or project their own sense of who she is. Either she's a lost girlfriend or someone they're in love with. So they project, their what do we call it? There's ultimate theme,
Their ultimate desires, I think. I mean,
ultimate desires
you know,
on
there
her.
are traces of this book of sort of elements that you see in treasure tales, where the characters, their cohesion, the, it's disrupted by their greed or their paranoia. And I always think of the movie The Treasure of the Sierra Madre,
Oh,
where you
good
have these,
reference.
right, you have, no, you have these three companions, and things happen. And so that it's a pretty typical story, though, in when it comes to treasure tales. So that, yeah, and it's interesting because the angel elicits these deep desires from each of these soldiers, and for it's to many of them, it's to their ruin.
Yeah,
And
because they are brought down by their greed, their narcissism, their own desires sort of do them in. They're projected on this angel, but that does turn her into a symbol. So it's confusing. She is a symbol at the same time as she's real, and she changes size. At one point, she's enormous. I never fully.
and then she finally speaks. We hear her
Well, when
voice.
she speaks, she's silent for most of the book, and then she speaks. It's it's confusing. Um, yeah. Do you think that was enough of a fault of the book that it marred the reading of it?
I when you read that passage to me, it impressed me all over again at the pace of the writing style. It's a very muscular writing style. But it's also fatiguing. It's breathless. It's frantic, just like with the war. I think.
Yes,
I,
just like
I
the
have
war experience,
I have
as
a
you said.
selection. I have a selection. I'll share. This is how he's good at describing people. Here he's talking about this certain major general who puts them who sets the command for them to rescue the angel, as having adenoid eyes, a noodle neck, a matronly pelvic misalignment that sets his feet at 10-10 configuration, shortcomings that Bagger presumes originated from whatever defect blighted Reese's right arm, which all the boys snicker about.
Yeah, muscular writing. I think anyone who appreciates and I appreciate muscular writing, can really enjoy this book. And I think maybe is it maybe it's nitpicking to criticize this sort of visual element of it, because I can enjoy a book purely on the writing, and on the humor. There isn't, and there is humor in this. There's very
There is
dark
humor.
humor.
Sure,
There is humor.
there's
There's
humor.
dark humor in this. He's not without wit. He's not without humor. And I appreciate that about it. It's just very dark. Um,
There's
I,
also it's very true to its time. He uses the phrase dunderhead, which you might have heard, from a Laurel and Hardy movie or something. I think he references Mary Pickford as
no,
the
no, feet
woman
of
of the
power.
mainstream.
Theda Bara. I want to correct you on that. It's not Mary Pickford. It's Theda Bara.
There was Mary Pickford mentioned,
All right, I stand
for
corrected.
sure.
He
Yeah,
also mentions Theda Bara. He uses language of the time. I think it's
of the
researched.
time, very consistently, which I, certain readers will appreciate. It might go over certain readers' heads. If you're reading on an electronic device, you can always look them up. That's what I did. There's also an element where he bonds with a young soldier who fraudulently enlists at age 14, and they use a book called Son of Tarzan,
I
which
like
was
that. Yeah.
and that's a theme throughout the book, is this reference to decisions made in the Son of Tarzan book, um, that
That's a
I
lovely reference.
appreciated. It was a
Yeah.
recurring element. The other element that's recurring is, it, he has father turmoil. His father was an Episcopalian bishop of some kind. Maybe we're not exactly sure if he's named a bishop from the Church of England, or whether he's kind of a store window pastor who calls himself bishop. But he has this feeling in his body of a fly trapped in his chest, which represents his father, and he refers to him as Uncle Sam. And that occurs throughout the whole book. He's with between Son of Tarzan and this Uncle Sam buzzing in his chest.
Huh.
We have this sort of sensory reaction to his emotions throughout the book.
Yeah, he uses a lot of sort of lingo, First World War lingo and phrases that he doesn't explain. So it creates a real um, sense of reality. And that what's the word? This the bringing
Verisimilitude.
verisimilitude. Thank you, sir. But that reference to his father, I think, is very important because after a while, I saw the paragraphs, which are all more or less the same size, as being sort of biblical. They reminded me of sort of Bible verses, and I think that may have been intentional. That he carries a Bible around with him that his father gave him. His father dies on the Lusitania. Um,
Right. Yeah.
right, and he
Another great historical reference
another
for
great
those
reference.
history buffs out there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's if I mean if there are history buffs, if they're First World War buffs, they will get a kick out of this book because I think he did the research for it, and
Well,
I like the
go ahead.
fact that he doesn't explain everything. I mean, there's no glossary at the back. You just have to. It's like in context, you can follow what's going on. But I like the terminology. He refers to ordnance and guns, and by what they called them, Vickers guns and various things. It's very the verisimilitude is very well done in this book. I'll give it that, absolutely.
There's a couple other stylistic things that I stood out to me. There was one where he's, in terms of the times of day, he describes the thin gruel of dawn. And I can't imagine any better description of looking up from a trench as the sun comes up, as
That's a
looking like
great That's a
thin
great line.
gruel.
That's a great description, and the book is full of those things.
I have
Thin
another one.
gruel. Yeah.
He's in no man's land, and he says that gunfire passes so close, it's like a piano string plucked against Bagger's ears.
Oh, yes, I remember that line. Yeah, that's evocative. That's poetic and evocative. That's what I'm saying about. That's what I said before about that uncanny combination of lyrical and graphic writing. But to me, it works graphically in the moment and not with the angel, which is the major aspect of the book. But those moments, the minute to minute moments of being in a trench, being on the front line. Um, it's in the last few weeks of the war. Remember, America's entry into the war was late, 1917, and then all of 1918 until the armistice, which was signed is November 11th, 1918. A lot of Europeans felt that was late. Americans were late in the World War II as well. Johnny come lately, where have you been? We needed you. But it was brutal on the front, and it is very evocative.
I've known you for a long time, and I've known you to say that World War One is one of the most interesting wars, or more interesting than to World War Two, the Great War. Why is it that you like? Why is it so absorbing to you? Besides the Snoopy cartoon,
There are two there are two experiences historically of the 20th century that I think a lot about, and I can't imagine myself in, even though, and I try. One is in a trench in World War One, and the other is in a concentration camp like Dachau or um, one of those. It's unimaginable horror. And so if you read about these those two events, the Holocaust and the First World War, kind of are almost twinned in my mind. They neither of them obviously should have happened. They were both were preventable, um, and they were just sort of we hear this term "hell on earth" sometimes as a saying, but that's what I'd imagine those. And I had an almost I had an uncanny experience once. I was at a antiquarian book fair in London about 30 years ago, and I saw on a table a big book. I opened it up, and it was full of photographs of severely wounded First World War veterans. These must have been taken by a hospital where these men were so facially scarred. I mean, they had parts of their faces, missing. They were so scarred that I imagine they lived permanently in this hospital. In these hospitals, they couldn't venture out. They would scare people. And as I was looking at these photographs, could hear this incredibly cacophonous, loud. It's hard for me to describe, but I felt like I heard the what it was like in the trenches. I've never experienced any other moment in my life like it was like it was a weird. When people say they've seen a ghost, I feel like I've heard a kind of a ghost. I feel like I've heard. It's just really odd. It was just
well,
maybe.
maybe we've answered the initial question at the beginning of this podcast: is why is a horror genre writer suited to write about World War One? But now I have another question, and that's why trench warfare? Whose idea was that to dig trenches and then attack each other? Have we done other wars like that? We didn't do it in World War II.
No, it was mostly a war of stasis. The other wars had more had movement in them, and
I see.
and the First World War got bogged down, and they would win in yards, not miles, not countries. It was a battle of yards, and it was the first fully mechanized war, and they had figured out how to brutally kill people in the most brutal manner possible. And it was guns fought, shells fired maybe a few hundred yards away, and the first use, I believe, of gas, mustard gas. And that's comparable to the death camps of the Nazis, that they would gas the enemy soldiers. Sometimes the wind would blow it back, and it would kill your own men,
Mm.
wound your own men. It was I think generals in field offices miles away, pushing little representations of battalions across a board that showed the countryside, and just it was so abstract to them, and the numbers are just unbelievable. On the first day of the Somme assault on the Somme on July 1st, 1916. This is before the Americans got involved in the war. It was supposed to be the big assault that would end the war. It turned out being midway through the war. July 1st, 1916, I believe the Allies, mostly British, lost, said 62,000 casualties. in one day in the first 12 hours. It was just absolutely brutal. The Battle of the Marne. Um, the French lost what, close to 1 million soldiers. I mean, the numbers are just staggering, and it was almost entirely men. It was not as many civilians as World War II. By World War II, they had invented or perfected aerial bombing of civilian targets in London and famously in Dresden and in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Berlin was absolute rubble. I mean, it was the number of civilians killed in the Second World War is astounding. But First World War was just a very small part of Western Europe, and the guns were so loud, some of them, the cannon, the major guns, that you could hear them in England, where there was no war in England except for Zeppelins occasionally dropping bombs on London. I think maybe.
And I think you told me once that you met a World War One veteran. Is that true, or were you imagining it, like you were
I met
imagining the sounds of gunfire?
I met a few First World War veterans. I mean, they were, when I was a boy in the late '60s, early '70s. There were, that was only 60 years after the end of the war. There were a lot of First War veterans in the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. They would wear these red uniforms and they had caps. You'd hang out in the pubs. They would have been in their 70s then, maybe 80s. They were still around. But I met and spoke to First World War veterans as late as 1985,
Hmm.
84, 85 in London. You could visit the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, and you could talk to these guys, and they would open up because they they these guys had lived by that point. By 1985, these guys, maybe some of them were, like, retired to the hospital. But I met one guy whose left hand was mostly blown off at the Battle of Neuve Chapelle, I think it's 1915. So I met him 70 years later. Um, and he couldn't look at his hand without being reminded of that war. This is something that stayed with him forever, and I was just fascinated. um, and as late as I think maybe 2006, this is when I returned to living in London. I believe an armistice day, November 11th, I think 2006, there were still 3 First World War veterans still alive who attended the memorial services on Whitehall. That's right near Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives. It's between Trafalgar Square and the Houses of Parliament. It's a very solemn occasion where the monarch at that point, it was Queen Elizabeth II, and the Prime Minister pay respects, and they lay a wreath. But they had 3 First World War veterans, one of whom, Tommy Patch, was 115 years old, and he was still, he still had all of his marbles, and he was rediscovered. He was discovered living in a retirement home. Someone couldn't believe that there was this guy. Here was this. Not only was he surviving, he fought in the trenches. Not only had Tommy Patch survived the trenches, but he could remember it. There was a documentary they made it. They interviewed him, and there was a book that came out. It was just fascinating, and that kind of brought the war a bit closer. And now in 2026, we're experiencing, the last of the Second World War, veterans, um, the last survivors of the Holocaust. This
Did
is going
Tommy
to be.
Patch give any advice on his longevity? Smoke lots of cigarettes, be in the war.
I'm sure he was asked that. I don't remember. I did meet a 101-year-old. This was only a few years, 3 or 4 years ago. I met a 101-year-old veteran of the Second World War, and he was in great shape. And I did ask him. I said, "How have he lasted so long?" And he said, "I volunteered for everything. I said yes to everything.
Hmm?
If they wanted to volunteer, I was there." And he was a cook. Yeah, he was a cook on one of
Wait,
the.
when you say volunteer, you mean during wartime or
I
in
think
his
both,
spare time?
wartime and peacetime. Just you say yes.
Well, Boomer has it,
Say
listeners.
yes.
There's some advice to live by.
Say yes. Don't. Yes. Say yes. That was. He also impressed me because he claimed, and I'll give him it. I claimed it. He claimed he had seen The Jazz Singer when it came out in 1927. This is the first wide release of a sound picture, so it was of great interest to
Wow,
me.
he was an early adopter.
He was. I met someone who saw The Jazz Singer on its initial release in 1927. And he said yes to everything, including when he was like 4 years old. He said yes to seeing Jazz Singer. But he was impressive. Anyway, going back to this book, it's interesting. I don't know why Daniel Kraus took this subject. Something must have struck him about is quite a departure for his subject matter.
I
Um,
have some. I have some vocabulary quiz for you. So, and
right.
this is another element of the book. I mean, he sort of breaks rules that I don't mind. I didn't mind the long sentence. Normally, that kind of stunt annoys me. He also uses some very unusual vocabulary that I have to look up. But the words are so interesting on the page that I didn't mind them. He talks about an I don't know if I can even say this, exsanguinated corpse.
Well, is that?
Exsanguinated means drained of blood. He
Oh
talks
no.
about the Eigengrau. It's the dark gray you see when you close your eyes in total darkness. He talks about someone's brain, the jellification of someone's brain. Pretty self-explanatory. Um, Two
Yeah.
more: tinabulation, a tinkling sound, and crepitating, a crackling sound. They kind of speak for themselves
Well,
in a great
they're
way.
what, onomatopoeic. I mean, you know how they do. He was a little word drunk, and if you're going to get drunk on words. That's the best kind of drinking you can do. It's the best sense. And as you said, you didn't have to look all of these up in context. You could probably figure them out, but also the sound of the words, the onomatopoeia of them. I think that's the word. Yes, he has wonderful vocabulary in this book. I mean, we are recommending it. I would recommend it, but I would almost recommend. There's certain films that make more sense the second time you sit through them. Maybe this is a book that makes more sense the second time you read it. And there are a lot of rereaders. I'm not one usually because I'm such a slow reader. I reread books years after I've initially read them, often because I've forgotten them.
Well, I mean, you might not have to read again. You may be able to watch it because, as we've learned, the book is set for production at some point, or maybe not yet in the production phase, but there are plans to produce
Yeah,
a
they
film.
sold the film rights. That doesn't always mean the film will get made, but
No, maybe
the film
never.
maybe never, or maybe will get made. I can't quite imagine. I this is one of those cases where I can't imagine a film of this book because you'd lose all the language, and to me, the book is language, and boiled down to its plot. The plot, in a way, is the least interesting thing about it. I think. What do you
In
think?
many ways. And there's a meta moment regarding some of the style, specifically the sentence. I don't think it's. I don't think I want to say it. I don't think I want to describe it. But there's one point in the book towards the end where the author pays attention, of averts his eyes from the story and guides the reader to something happening, which is the sentence, and makes a note about it. And I found it again. It was a meta moment that I think would have normally annoyed me, but I went with it.
That's
So hats
that's
off to
Brechtian.
Daniel Kraus.
Yeah, that's a Brechtian. There's a term for that. I forget. There's that's a but that's a Brechtian moment. Do you mean it draws attention to the artifice of the work?
Correct, correct,
Yeah,
exactly that. And
right.
I wonder if it's worth saying something about the Pulitzer Prize. Again, it's sort of interesting to imagine what the Pulitzer board, who selects the fiction prize, how they deliberated over it. And as you know, it's an annual award. It recognizes achievements in journalism, but also literature, drama, and music. I think it dates back to 1917 by a newspaper publisher eponymously named Joseph Pulitzer. And until recently, it was a pretty strict prize. The journalism was only for print publications. Um, but in recent years, it's expanded to online only news, like ProPublica, for example, or HuffPost. Later, they only included later magazine publishing in the years to come. You couldn't be a Pulitzer Prize winning magazine writer, but now they have audio reporting, TV, audio, and broadcast. It's a good cause. It's not a massive award. I think winners earn about $15,000, so it's a
Wow.
pretty modest.
But
And
you get to have that
it
stamp on your book, Pulitzer Prize winner. That's worth more than $15,000.
that's worth more than that. But it's in terms of the audio broadcast, we can, fingers crossed, Boomer Has It might make its way to
In the running.
the Pulitzer board someday.
Yeah, yeah.
Have we done enough service for Angel Down, or do you have any other comments, anything that we might have missed?
I think we've probably covered what we can cover. It's a real recommend from me, and I think starting this podcast, I wasn't sure if it would be, but thinking about it, it's like one of those books or films or plays that kind of stays in your mind. Um, and it does stay in your mind. It sort of burrows into your mind. But I think it's an interesting book. Yeah. Do you have a head quake?
Well, yeah. Maybe let's just remind everyone what a headquake is. It's something that passes by our consciousness that gives us a headache or an earthquake, a mental earthquake,
Yeah.
positive or negative. Mine was something that I stumbled across. It's speaking of Pulitzer Prize winning online news organizations, ProPublica followed up on a pretty disturbing story a year or two ago. There's an author named Alice Sebold. She wrote a book called The Lovely Bones, which was an international bestseller, and followed up with an international best-selling memoir. The memoir is about her sexual assault. It's heartbreaking. And a few years ago, DNA testing revealed that the man she identified as her attacker was not the right person. And ProPublica did a painstaking follow-up. We should all allocate a little bit of our savings to ProPublica because of the good work they do. And what came out of the story that was so interesting was that Hollywood, Jane Campion in particular, the director and her screenwriter, were interested in adapting the memoir called Lucky for film. And in doing their initial research, they uncovered inconsistencies in some of the trial evidence. And they approached the DA's office in Onondaga County, which is New York State, and Syracuse, the city of Syracuse, and they begged off from the project. Someone else got their hands on it, another producer, and he actually hired a detective to get to the bottom of it, and it turned up more inconsistencies, which set ProPublica on the case. So this is one of those rare instances where Hollywood veers off from pure entertainment into investigation and clearing people of their criminal convictions. No laughing matter. Sorry about that.
That's an amazing story, and I think, as you said, we should support ProPublica and also support Hollywood. You can do both by sending money to ProPublica and going to the movies, supporting the great moral guardians of our time in Hollywood. But it's a. I remember when that story came out, and it's pretty fascinating. Um, and
It's
but
tragic all around and awful.
yeah,
And but these elements, where there's information, there's a way to absolution. Maybe, I don't know. And with that heady thought, I'll pass it on to you for your head quake. Hopefully, something lighter.
it is. It is. I have a light head. I don't know if it could be lighter than this, and that is I was inspired by a friend. This was just yesterday. She emailed me. She's a movie nut like I am. Well, she knows probably a lot more about the movies than I do. And she said she had just rewatched Blazing Saddles. She hadn't seen for years and didn't think much initially of, and she loved it. And I thought, oh, that's one to watch tonight. So last night I watched Blazing Saddles. That's a boomer comedy if there ever was one. It came out in 1974. Mel Brooks directed it and co-wrote it with four other writers. It's a film that couldn't get made today, probably because of multi-use of the N-word, which in context makes perfect sense. It makes fun of everyone,
Not
and
only that, a man slugs a horse, if I recall correctly.
there is and yes, you could not do that now. There's cruelty to horses in this that you could not get away with. But this man literally punches a horse, and I think I know how they did it. I think, but I didn't even want to say how they did it. But he does punch a horse, and it falls over a real horse. Um,
There's flatulence.
there's famous flatulence. There's a scene where there are cowboys sitting around eating baked beans, and there's farting that goes on for about 90 seconds. Which in the television edit of it, they cut out the sound of the farting, which defeats the whole purpose of the scene. So you just see the cowboys sort of getting up when they're so they can fart, but all you hear are horses neighing, and it makes no sense. Television.
Listeners of Boomer Has It, this is the first time we've ever used the F word on our show, and we will never do it again. Our apologies.
It will be the last. So see it on DVD, which has the unedited version, and it also has my version has scenes from the television edit. Madeline Kahn is hilarious in it. She plays Maria von Stuck, I think that was her name. It's a great a satire of Marlene Dietrich, and she got an Academy Award nomination for it, and she's just hilarious. Mel Brooks wrote a song for her called "I'm So Tired." I'm tired of being tired. She's tired of men who are always coming and going and going and coming, and always too soon. It's just brilliant. So that is my head quake, a recommendation if there ever was one. You boomers and other younguns, get thee to Blazing Saddles. You'll be glad you did. Do you remember that?
And
Do you remember Blazing Saddles? When
I
did you last?
remember when it came out in the theater at the lunch table, all the kids were talking about it. I remember, I think Cleavon Little is the
Oh,
gunslinger who rides in on the horizon,
he's a
and he's
sheriff. They make him
he's the
sheriff.
sheriff, and
That's
he's
to
his
try to drive
partner,
everyone out of town.
and Gene Wilder is his partner. And
Yeah.
we've been recently rewatching a show called Bored to Death with Jason Schwartzman, who it took me a while to realize it, but he absolutely, in his manner, his acting style, absolutely channels Gene Wilder,
Really?
who
I've
has
never
this
noticed that. I'll have to
very
check that out.
thoughtful way of talking and taking in the other person on the set, taking them in so thoughtfully, almost like a priest or a rabbi listening and talking with such care. It's a very charming kind of style.
Well,
And
that's
Cleveland
another
Little
recommendation.
was a great stage actor in his
They,
time.
they they wanted Richard Pryor, who's one of the co-writers. Mel Brooks wrote that part for Richard Pryor, who wasn't that well known then. He was only known for his stand-up in L.A. was before he was really famous, and Mel Brooks wanted him, and they didn't cast him because he was not reliable. He was supposed to show up for filming, and he didn't show up, and they reached him. He was in New Orleans or somewhere. He just left town, and they realized they needed someone more reliable, so they hired Cleveland Little. You actually can't imagine anyone else in that role. He's just so funny and so brilliant. But it's a great cast. But going back to your reference point of Bored to Death, I think that's another series. It's a series we can recommend. Was that on
Anytime.
HBO?
We could
Was that on
recommend that anytime. It's about, I think it's 10 or 15 years, at least 15 years old, but
Ted,
holds up terrifically.
Ted Danson is one of the. Who's it? Ted Danson, Jason Schwartzman. Who's the other? Who's the third?
Zach Galifianakis.
Oh my God, an early Zach Galifianakis. Wow, that's quite a cast. And you can find that. What platform could our viewers and listeners find Bored to Death on? Because it wasn't shown here.
That would be on HBO.
HBO. All right. I bought American DVDs of it and had to watch it on one of my.
It's a very funny show. The characters are
fun.
lovable. It's good natured. It's big hearted. And what I like about it the most is it is just unabashedly literary loving. There are literary references, to cinema, art, all through the show, and
Well,
it's just
it's
hilarious.
created by a novelist, by a writer, right? What's his name? The guy
His
who
name is
wrote
Jonathan Ames,
Jonathan Ames.
who has a small role in the show, very
Oh,
small,
okay.
but very
I don't
funny.
know what he would look like. He wrote it. He came out with a novel. Came out slightly before, around about a year before my first book came out. So like the late '80s, called "I Pass Like Night." I think. Do you remember that?
I don't, but
It
he's
was vintage
and we
contemporary.
haven't heard much from him lately, but he creeps into the zeitgeist every now and then with something very interesting, and haven't heard much from him lately. But
Well,
maybe we'll take a look and report back to
yeah,
Boomer
yeah.
Has It listeners.
Channeling Jonathan Ames. Where are you? We need you back. Bored to Death. High recommendation. Highly recommended. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that does it for us this week. I am JB Miller in London.
And I'm Jim Jalamas at home here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. See ya, folks.
See ya. Bye.